The lights dim, the smoke curls, and the murmur of a packed crowd fades into a single beam of spotlight. Don Rickles stands center stage, his expression half smirk, half snarl. The merchant of venom is in his element. His eyes can front row like a radar. Then suddenly, he stops. There sits Ernest Borgnine, broad-shouldered, grinning, the face of a man who's seen war, love, and the Hollywood machine. Rickles leans forward. "Look at that face," he fires. If Mount Rushmore ever sneezed, that's what would happen. The audience erupts in laughter. Borgnine laughs too, sort of. Behind that grin, maybe, there's a flicker of irritation. Or maybe not. And that's where our story begins. Because for years, fans have whispered, did Don Rickles truly hate Ernest Borgnine? Was it real disdain hidden beneath the comedic act? Or was it the purest form of Rickles' backhanded affection? To answer that, we need to step off the stage, behind the laughter, and into the lives of two of the most stubborn, larger-than-life figures to ever cross paths in Hollywood. Don Rickles, born in 1926 in Queens, New York, was a man who found his way through the noise by weaponizing humor. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he tried acting, only to find his real power in making people laugh, especially when they were the butt of the joke. His act was brutal, quick, and fearless. From Frank Sinatra to Ronald Reagan, no one was safe. Yet somehow, everyone adored him for it. Ernest Borgnine was cut from a different cloth. Born almost a decade earlier, in 1917, in Connecticut to Italian immigrant parents, he lived through hardship and war before Hollywood ever came calling. After serving 10 years in the Navy, he returned home with no plan, until his mother suggested acting. The result? One of the most rugged, authentic presences ever to hit American screens. From the gentle, lonely butcher in Marty, which won him an Academy Award, to tough military men and villains in From Here to Eternity and The Dirty Dozen, Borgnine became Hollywood's everyman, the face of resilience. So what happens when two men like that collide? One who lives to provoke, and one who doesn't back down. Their connection was as unpredictable as it was explosive. They shared a stage in The Odd Couple, appeared together in roasts, and for years became the subject of whispered feuds and side-eyed jokes from other stars. Rickles would mock Borgnine relentlessly. His looks, his voice, even his marriages, and audiences couldn't get enough. But somewhere behind the laughter, there was respect and perhaps a bit of real tension. In this video, we're going behind the curtain. We'll trace how their relationship began, how it evolved, and how two men, so different in temperament yet so similar in stubborn pride, created one of the strangest love-hate stories in show business. From the first insult to the final farewell, we'll dig into the truth. Was it hostility, or an unlikely friendship forged through fire and laughter? We'll start at the beginning, with two rising stars walking very different roads of fame. Then we'll explore what happened when those paths finally crossed. The clashes, the collaborations, the rumors that wouldn't die. And in the end, we'll see how both men, Rickles with his razor-tongued charm and Borgnine with his rough but open heart, came to represent something much bigger, the unspoken bond between comedy and character. Because sometimes the sharpest insult hides the deepest respect. And sometimes the person you hate the most is the one who brings out your truest self. In the bright, restless energy of post-war America, two men were chasing the same dream, but taking wildly different roads to get there. Don Rickles, a kid from Queens with sharp tongue and sharper wit, and Ernest Borgnine, a weathered Navy veteran with a face built for tragedy and triumph. Both wanted to make their mark on Hollywood, but neither could have predicted how their paths, so different in tone and temperament, would someday collide in laughter, fire, and a few bruised egos along the way. Don Rickles was born in 1926 in Queens, New York, to Jewish parents who encouraged his early love for performing. After graduating high school, he served in the U.S. Navy during World War II aboard the USS Cyrene. When the war ended, he tried his hand at acting, enrolling in the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. But the parts weren't coming. The rejection wore on him, until he realized he didn't need a script to make people react. He began performing at small clubs, and when hecklers interrupted him, he fought back with quick, biting comebacks. The audience roared. That's when Rickles found his weapon: insult comedy. What started as survival on stage soon became a phenomenon. He built his act on fearless improvisation, targeting everyone from the front row to the front page. No one was safe, politicians, celebrities, even his friends. His sharpest moment came when Frank Sinatra, already one of the most powerful men in entertainment, became a fan. Rickles once quipped to Sinatra in a club, "Make yourself at home, Frank. Hit somebody." Instead of taking offense, Sinatra loved it. That one exchange transformed Rickles' career. Soon he was performing in Las Vegas, appearing on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, and earning the affectionate nickname Mr. Warmth, a title so ironic it became legendary. Ernest Borgnine's journey couldn't have been more different. Born Ernest Borgnine in 1917 in Hamden, Connecticut, to Italian immigrant parents, his life was grounded in grit and perseverance. After serving 10 years in the U.S. Navy, Borgnine returned home without direction. It was his mother who suggested he try acting, a suggestion that changed the course of his life. He trained at Randall's Island and then in regional theater, slowly building a reputation as a dependable, powerful performer. His big break came in 1953's From Here to Eternity, where he played the cruel Sergeant Fatso Judson. But 2 years later, Borgnine would redefine himself completely with Marty, the story of a kind-hearted butcher searching for love. The film won him the Academy Award for Best Actor, proving that behind the tough exterior was a man of deep empathy and humanity. While Rickles made people laugh by tearing down egos, Borgnine built a career by embodying men whose pride was all they had left. Rickles thrived on chaos, timing, and verbal fire. Borgnine drew strength from silence, weight, and soul. Rickles was a live wire, always looking for the next reaction. Borgnine was the anchor, grounded and commanding. They were, in every way, opposites, and that's exactly why their eventual crossing was inevitable. By the 1960s, both men had carved out their places in Hollywood's ecosystem. Rickles on the comedy stages of Vegas and television talk shows, Borgnine in films, television dramas, and eventually as the star of McHale's Navy. The entertainment world was shrinking. Circles were tightening and talent was colliding. When the opportunity came for both to work together on the stage production of The Odd Couple, it was the perfect storm waiting to happen. The explosive comedian and the disciplined actor, each accustomed to commanding a room, now forced to share one. Two men from the same American century, molded by war, ambition, and ego, walking two paths that would soon converge. Neither of them knew it yet, but their meeting would spark one of Hollywood's most talked-about rivalries, and perhaps one of its most misunderstood friendships. The late 1960s were a golden age for live entertainment, a world where film stars, comedians, and crooners move in the same glittering orbit of smoke-filled rooms, red curtains, and flashing spotlights. It was in this swirling mix of talent and ego that Don Rickles and Ernest Borgnine first crossed paths. The exact night is lost to time, but all signs point to the show business social circuit, those lively after-parties, variety specials, and most famously, the celebrity roasts where reputations were made, bruised, and occasionally burned to ash. Don Rickles was already a known quantity by then, a king of insult comedy, beloved by audiences and feared by guests. His appearances on The Dean Martin Show and later The Dean Martin Celebrity Roast cemented his legend. No one else could tear down a Hollywood giant and make them thank him afterward. From Frank Sinatra to Ronald Reagan, Rickles went after everyone, and the more famous the target, the sharper his jokes. Ernest Borgnine, with his stocky frame and expressive face, was a perfect bullseye. Borgnine had become a household name thanks to Marty, but his career had since expanded far beyond that tender portrayal. He'd played villains, soldiers, and even lovable goofballs, and by the late 1960s, he was as much a part of the Hollywood tapestry as Rickles himself. When the Dean Martin roast took off, Borgnine was there, often both as a roastee and a good sport in the crowd. And every time Rickles spotted him, the insults came flying like fastballs. Ernie Borgnine, Rickles might bark. Ladies and gentlemen, there he is, proof that God ran out of good faces halfway through the century. The audience would explode, and Borgnine, usually quick to laugh, would grin and shake his head. Whether he enjoyed the jokes or endured them for the sake of crowd, only he truly knew. Those roasts became the earliest public battleground between the two men. Rickles firing verbal missiles, Borgnine catching them with that same unflinching resilience that made him a screen legend. Yet underneath the laughter, something more complicated was brewing. Rickles' insults were never random. He often reserved his sharpest blows for people he respected, a paradox that confused many who didn't know him personally. To outsiders, it looked like hostility, but to insiders, it was affection delivered through mock aggression. The question was whether Borgnine, a man of old-school pride and seriousness, always understood that distinction. Their first real collaboration would come a few years later, in 1967, when both men were cast in the West Coast stage production of Neil Simon's The Odd Couple. It was a daring pairing. Don Rickles, the unpredictable comedian, as Felix Unger, the neurotic, fussy neat freak, and Ernest Borgnine, the commanding character actor, as Oscar Madison, the messy, gruff sportswriter. The play, already a Broadway hit, demanded tight timing and perfect chemistry. For audiences, it was an irresistible combination. Reports from that period described sold-out performances and critical praise. Rickles brought surprising vulnerability to the stage, while Borgnine's booming energy anchored production. But behind the curtain, whispers of friction started to surface. Rickles' loose, improvisational style often clashed with Borgnine's disciplined, by-the-book acting approach. Where Rickles wanted spontaneity and chaos, Borgnine valued structure and rhythm. Each was used to being the loudest voice in the room, and neither liked to yield. The tension between them wasn't the fiery kind that ends partnerships. It was subtler, like static electricity that never quite grounded. Rickles, forever the provocateur, would toss jabs at Borgnine even backstage, testing his patience. Borgnine, proud and seasoned, took it with a half-smile but never forgot the sting. Yet, when the curtain rose, something electric happened. The audience's laughter fused their differences into perfect comedic rhythm. The Odd Couple on stage wasn't just a play. It was a reflection of their real dynamic. The meticulous performer and the unpredictable comic locked in eternal contrast. Over time, fans began to notice that Rickles seemed to single Borgnine out more than most. The jokes about his looks, his roles, even his age, none were off limits. Some took it as proof that Rickles genuinely disliked him. Others, especially those familiar with Rickles' philosophy of comedy, saw it differently. Rickles never insulted those he didn't care about. To be roasted by Don Rickles was, in a twisted way, a badge of honor, a sign that you were part of his circle of affection. Still, the public perception of animosity stuck. It became part of mythology, the loud-mouthed comic and the gruff Oscar winner, trapped in a dance of laughter, pride, and the occasional bruise to the ego. Whether they were friends or frenemies depended on the night, and perhaps on how hard the punchline landed. Their paths had crossed, and the sparks were undeniable. What started as laughter on stage was beginning to look like something deeper, a relationship built on tension, talent, and a strange kind of respect that neither man would ever fully admit. Don Rickles' comedy was a high-wire act of insult and affection. He'd stride onto a stage, scan the crowd, and unleash a flurry of jokes so sharp they could slice through steel. Yet somehow, the laughter that followed made it all feel like a celebration, not an attack. If I insult someone and mean it, he often said, wouldn't be funny. That single line defined his entire philosophy. For Rickles, mockery wasn't cruelty, it was theater. He was a roast master, a showbiz court jester who mocked the powerful precisely because he loved the spotlight they shared. But Ernest Borgnine was a different breed of performer. The Oscar-winning actor was no stranger to intense emotions, on or off the screen. He was famously strong-willed, an alpha presence in any room, with a booming laugh that could turn thunderous in anger. His 5 marriages, including one that lasted just 32 days with singer Ethel Merman, painted a portrait of a man whose passions ran deep and sometimes combusted. Borgnine came from the world of drama and structure, where scripts mattered, marks were hit, and craft was sacred. Rickles, by contrast, thrived on chaos, the energy of improvisation, the dangerous thrill of not knowing what would come next. When those two forces met in a rehearsal room, sparks were inevitable. During their stage collaboration in The Odd Couple in 1967, tensions between the comic and the character actor reportedly surfaced. Rickles would veer off script, tossing spontaneous lines that sent audiences into hysterics, but left Borgnine momentarily off balance. Borgnine, ever professional, would try to steer things back to the script. Rickles, sensing the discomfort, might double down just to get a rise. What one saw as play, the other might have viewed as disruption. There's no surviving footage of those exchanges, but theatrical accounts from that time describe both men as commanding presences, each trying to dominate the room in his own way. Behind the curtain, the friction may have been as lively as their onstage chemistry. Crew members and other actors, recalling those productions years later, often mention how Rickles' antics pushed boundaries. He'd joke in rehearsals, ad-lib insults between takes, or tease colleagues until they cracked. Some found it endearing, others exhausting. For a performer like Borgnine, who approached acting as a discipline, it could feel like unprofessional chaos. Yet in performance, the tension somehow translated into magic. The fussy Felix and the slovenly Oscar battling it out night after night with the same unpredictable rhythm that mirrored their real lives. In the years that followed, Rickles continued to take playful shots at Borgnine in public. At various events and interviews, his humor was relentless. "Borgnine's here tonight. Thank God, because I thought they'd stop letting animals in." The audience would roar, and cameras would pan to Borgnine, smiling tightly or throwing up a mock salute. It was pure Rickles. Insult is affection. But for audiences who didn't know the deeper context, it looked like open hostility. Hollywood gossip columns began running with the narrative. The rumor mill started to spin. Rickles can't stand Borgnine. Rickles roasted him one too many times. They nearly came to blows backstage. Whether any of it was true didn't matter. Perception had already hardened into legend. And yet, years later, in the acclaimed documentary Mr. Warmth, the Don Rickles Project, Ernest Borgnine appeared on camera to talk about Rickles, not as an enemy, but as a peer. In that film, which won an Emmy and offered an unflinching look at Rickles' life and work, Borgnine's tone was one of begrudging respect. He recounted moments of Rickles' biting humor and admitted that while the insults could sting, they were always delivered with a strange kind of warmth. That was Don, he seemed to suggest, unfiltered, unafraid, and unforgettable. Other performers in the same documentary echoed that sentiment. Johnny Carson, Clint Eastwood, and Bob Newhart all describe Rickles as a man whose act depended on affection. He had to like you to insult you. The ones he ignored were the ones he truly didn't care about. Still, even that understanding didn't erase the tension. Borgnine's pride and Rickles' irreverence were oil and water. Their personalities, one built on structure, the other on chaos, created a chemistry that was thrilling for audiences but exhausting in real life. During one roast in the mid-1970s, Rickles' jokes about Borgnine's appearance reportedly went too far, even for the famously thick-skinned actor. A few audience members recalled seeing Borgnine's face harden before he forced a laugh. It became one of those whispered-about moments in showbiz lore, proof, some claimed, that Rickles had crossed a line. But that was Rickles' genius and curse. He was perpetually dancing on the edge of offense, relying on charm and timing to keep from falling over. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Borgnine, for all his good humor, was not the kind of man to let mockery slide easily. His military background, his no-nonsense attitude, and his lifelong insistence on respect made him an unusual target for Rickles' brand of love through insult. And the more the public saw Rickles roasting Borgnine, the more they assumed real hatred lurked beneath the jokes. Over the years, gossip columns and late-night monologues kept the myth alive. A new generation of fans, discovering old roast footage, took the banter at face value. They didn't hear the subtext of friendship or a performer's code that governed Rickles' act. To them, the barbs sounded brutal. The laughter looked forced. And soon, a Hollywood rumor was born. Don Rickles truly hated Ernest Borgnine. In truth, what existed between them was far more layered. Rickles needed strong personalities to play off, and Borgnine was as formidable as they came. Borgnine, for his part, seemed to both bristle at and admire Rickles' fearlessness. Their relationship, part rivalry, part reluctant brotherhood, became a case study in how two larger-than-life men could clash spectacularly yet still respect each other's art. By the time Mr. Warmth was released, any real bitterness had long since cooled. Borgnine's inclusion in the film was its own quiet admission. Whatever sparks had once flown, time had turned them into embers of mutual acknowledgement. Still, the legend endured. Rickles hated Borgnine, became one of those Hollywood half-truths that people repeated because it felt good to believe. But beneath the jokes, the tension, and bravado lay something simpler and truer. Two titans of their craft, bound by ego, laughter, and the unspoken understanding that sometimes the hardest it's come from those who mean no harm at all. By the time The Odd Couple wrapped its run, something curious had happened between Don Rickles and Ernest Borgnine. What began as a clash of personalities, an improviser versus a disciplinarian, evolved into a strange kind of mutual respect. Beneath the teasing, behind the rolled eyes and verbal jabs, both men recognized something in the other that Hollywood rarely rewarded: authenticity. Rickles was brutally honest in his humor, and Borgnine was brutally honest in his emotion. They were, in a sense, two different kinds of truth-tellers performing in the same room. Their work on The Odd Couple remained their most significant collaboration. The production was a hit among audiences on the West Coast, earning critical praise for its chemistry. Rickles as the neurotic, fussy Felix, and Borgnine as the gruff, world-weary Oscar. Critics noted that their pairing had an unusual electricity. The roles seemed to mirror their real-life dynamics. Rickles' rapid-fire energy balanced perfectly with Borgnine's grounded realism. On stage, what might have been tension in rehearsal transformed into a seamless dance between two veterans. Each night was unpredictable, alive with small improvisations and reactions that kept audiences enthralled. That was their gift to each other. Rickles brought the spark, Borgnine brought the weight. Together, they found balance. Off stage, moments of camaraderie slowly began to surface. Crew members and contemporaries described how Borgnine, initially irritated by Rickles' improvisational chaos, started to appreciate it. During late-night rehearsals, Rickles would break the tension with his trademark wit, throwing out absurd lines just to make the cast laugh. Borgnine, who prided himself on professionalism, eventually couldn't resist. His booming laugh would echo through the theater, and once he started laughing, the entire crew relaxed. Rickles had that effect on people. His humor disarmed even the most serious souls. In those small moments, the ice between them began to melt. Years later, their dynamic was revisited in the Emmy-winning documentary Mr. Warmth, the Don Rickles Project. Directed by John Landis, the film featured interviews with some of Hollywood's biggest names: Clint Eastwood, Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro, and yes, Ernest Borgnine. Borgnine's participation was telling. Despite being on the receiving end of Rickles' fiercest roasts, he agreed to appear, sharing his memories with a tone that combined fondness and amusement. His willingness to be part of that tribute spoke volumes. Borgnine didn't have to be there. By then, he was in his 90s, long past the point of needing Hollywood validation. His inclusion was a gesture of peace and respect. In the documentary, Borgnine reflected on Rickles' comedy style with an understanding only a fellow veteran could express. He admitted that Don's humor could be biting, but insisted there was always warmth beneath it. He described Rickles as a performer who said what everyone else was thinking, but didn't have the guts to say. Coming from a man who built his career playing tough, straightforward characters, that was high praise. For Borgnine, Rickles' lack of pretense was refreshing. He didn't hide behind charm or diplomacy. He simply was. And Borgnine, who had lived through Hollywood's insincerities, respected that. The relationship between the two men also offered clear benefits. For Rickles, working with Borgnine gave him credibility beyond the comedy circuit. Rickles had always been known as the insult king, the master of roast stages in Vegas showrooms. But acting alongside an Academy Award-winning performer like Borgnine lent him dramatic legitimacy. It proved he could hold his own among serious actors, not just comedians. That crossover appeal helped Rickles sustain a long career that included memorable film roles, like his part in Kelly's Heroes, and later, voice acting as Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story. For Borgnine, the collaboration gave him something different: levity, known for intense, dramatic, or physically demanding roles. From Marty to the Dirty Dozen to McHale's Navy, he had little opportunity to show his lighter side. Rickles' influence offered him a window into comedy, a space where he could laugh at himself and be part of the joke. During interviews in the 1970s, Borgnine often spoke about the importance of not taking oneself too seriously in the business. It's easy to imagine that perspective being shaped, in part, by his encounters with Rickles. Behind the scenes, the two also shared common ground in ways that surprised many. Both were veterans, Rickles having served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and Borgnine having served for nearly a decade before turning to acting. That shared military background instilled a mutual respect for discipline and loyalty. In the language of servicemen, insults were often just another form of bonding, a tradition of ribbing and toughness that forged friendship. Rickles' roasting, in that sense, might have resonated more deeply with Borgnine than outsiders realized. As the years went on, the feud that fans loved to gossip about softened into affectionate myth. The public might have seen two men trading jabs, but their peers saw two professionals who understood the game. When Borgnine was asked late in life about Rickles' jokes, he laughed them off. "That's just Don being Don," he said in one interview, with the easy confidence of someone who'd long stopped taking it personally. Rickles, for his part, continued to speak fondly of Borgnine in later years, praising him as a hell of an actor and a real guy, the highest compliment in Rickles' vocabulary. In truth, their relationship came to embody the paradox of the heart of show business: competition mixed with admiration, friction that fuels creativity, and humor that masks deep respect. They didn't always get along, but they understood each other. Rickles needed men like Borgnine to test his sharpness, to give his comedy weight. Borgnine needed men like Rickles to remind him that even the toughest exterior benefits from a little laughter. By the time both men had reached the twilight of their lives, whatever tension had once existed was long gone, replaced by a sense of shared history. In a world built on egos and spotlight battles, Don Rickles and Ernest Borgnine stood as proof that respect doesn't always look like kindness, and friendship doesn't always sound like praise. Sometimes it sounds like a perfectly timed insult, followed by the kind of laughter that only comes from two men who've seen, survived, and savored it all together. As both men entered their later years, the noise of the spotlight began to quiet, and time softened whatever sharp edges had once existed between Don Rickles and Ernest Borgnine. The showbiz whirlwind that had once fueled their rivalry gave way to reflection and nostalgia. Both men, in their own ways, aged into legends, Rickles as the last of the true insult comics, and Borgnine as one of Hollywood's most enduring character actors. By the 2000s, the notion of animosity between them had become more myth than memory. They had lived long enough to see their reputations evolve, and both seemed content to let old tensions fade into the background. Public appearances together were rare in their final years, but they were never marked by animosity. In interviews, when Rickles' name came up, Borgnine smiled and spoke with amusement, as though remembering a mischievous younger brother. And when Rickles talked about the peers he respected most, he often mentioned men like Borgnine, those who took the work seriously but never themselves. There was no public feud to settle, no apology needed. Their conflict had always existed more in performance than in reality, a shared act that blurred the line between roast and reverence. By the time Borgnine passed away in July 2012 at the age of 95, he had come to be recognized not just as an actor of range and longevity, but as one of the few remaining bridges to Hollywood's golden age. His performances in Marty, The Dirty Dozen, McHale's Navy, and countless television and film roles had earned him a permanent place in American culture. In his final interviews, Borgnine reflected on life and career with humor and grace, always emphasizing hard work, respect, and the importance of enjoying what you do. That philosophy of finding joy even in struggle felt like a mirror image of Rickles' approach to comedy. Rickles, meanwhile, continued performing well into his 80s. Though his body slowed, his wit never dulled. He toured, appeared on late-night shows, and was celebrated as a living relic of an era when humor was sharper and hearts were thicker-skinned. In 2017, at the age of 90, Don Rickles passed away at his home in Los Angeles from kidney failure. His death sparked an outpouring of tributes from across the entertainment world. Comedians, actors, and directors spoke of him not as a cynic, but as a man who built connection through comedy. He was kind underneath the sting, Jimmy Kimmel said. He insulted because he cared. The legacy Rickles left behind was one of warmth disguised as fire. His roast style, merciless yet affectionate, had influenced generations of comics. Even Toy Story 4, released 2 years after his death, paid tribute to him by including his voice posthumously, pieced together from archival recordings, and dedicating the film to his memory. It was a poetic send-off for a man who had spent his life making others laugh by saying what others wouldn't dare. Looking back, the myth that Don Rickles truly hated Ernest Borgnine more than anyone reads less like a statement of fact and more like a testament to their chemistry. Rickles' sharp as barbs often targeted the people he respected most. The more he teased someone, the more he admired them. In that light, his relentless jabs at Borgnine weren't signs of hatred. They were acknowledgement of equality. Borgnine wasn't just another Hollywood face to poke fun at. He was a worthy opponent, someone strong enough to take the hit and laugh back. Their exchanges weren't cruelty. They were two titans playing a long-running game of pride and performance. Their story, when seen from a distance, feels almost Shakespearean, a relationship defined by contrast and connection. Rickles, the jester who mocked kings, and Borgnine, the steadfast everyman who embodied resilience. Together, they demonstrated how humor and respect can coexist even amid conflict. Theirs was a dynamic built on tension, but rooted in admiration. Today, fans revisit clips from the Dean Martin roast or The Odd Couple and still debate whether Rickles went too far, whether Borgnine was truly offended, or whether it was all a masterclass in controlled chaos. But perhaps that ambiguity is what makes their story endure. The truth is simpler and deeper. Don Rickles didn't hate Ernest Borgnine. He needed him. And Borgnine, whether he'd admit it or not, enjoyed being needed. In the end, their connection stands as a reminder that behind every sharp tongue can lie a generous heart. Rickles' insults were his way of saying, "You matter enough for me to joke about you." And Borgnine's willingness to take those hits with dignity was his way of replying, "I know." Their laughter, sometimes uneasy, sometimes genuine, echoes as proof that even in Hollywood's ruthless world, the line between rivalry and respect can be as thin as the pause before a punchline. In the end, the supposed feud between Don Rickles and Ernest Borgnine tells us more about performance than about personal animosity. Rickles' insult persona, the sharp-tongued Mr. Warmth, who skewered everyone from presidents to pop stars, was never about cruelty. It was a mask, a showman's tool. Beneath the jabs and mockery lay a strange tenderness, the kind of affection only a performer could express through laughter that stung just enough to make it memorable. For Rickles, humor wasn't a weapon. It was a handshake offered sideways. Every insult was a coded message. You're in on the joke. You belong here. Ernest Borgnine, with his gruff exterior and deep reservoir of emotional truth, represented the opposite pole, a man of heart and seriousness, whose roles demanded sincerity over sarcasm. When these two collided, it wasn't hatred, it was chemistry. The friction between Rickles' mischief and Borgnine's gravity produced moments of undeniable magic. Their clashes, both real and rumored, sharpened their performances and deepened their connection. The laughter that erupted between them was forged from tension, the kind that only two strong egos, locked in mutual respect, could generate. In that sense, their story stands as proof that creative tension can be an engine of greatness. Every artist knows that collaboration isn't always peaceful. Sometimes friction fuels brilliance. The Odd Couple was a perfect metaphor for their real dynamic. One man obsessively orderly, the other gloriously chaotic. Together, they made something that neither could have achieved alone. What audiences saw as hostility may well have been the natural energy of two masters pushing each other to their best. And yet, myths are irresistible. Rickles' hated Borgnine makes for a catchy headline. It simplifies complexity into something dramatic and digestible. Hollywood has always thrived on stories like that. But the truth, as always, is messier. When we dig deeper, through documentaries, interviews, and archival material, the supposed feud dissolves into nuance. There was teasing, ego, misunderstanding, but also respect, laughter, and even admiration. They didn't need to announce friendship. It lived quietly in a way they kept showing up in each other's orbits. Audiences love stories like this because they peel back the sheen of stardom and expose the human heart beating underneath. We want to believe that legends like Rickles and Borgnine lived larger than life, but also that they, too, wrestle with pride, humor, and reconciliation. Their relationship reminds us that even the fiercest words can carry affection, and even a joke can hold truth. So, return one last time to that imagined moment. The smoky club, the spotlight, the laughter swelling. Don Rickles stands on stage, squinting to the haze, his gaze finding Ernest Borgnine in the crowd. He cracks a wicked grin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, "a man I truly can't stand, but I love him anyway." The crowd erupts. Borgnine laughs, shaking his head, that familiar spark in his eyes. That's the real story. Not hate, but performance. Not enmity, but energy. Two men larger than life, using humor and heart to carve their place in history. The line between insult and affection was thin, but they both knew how to walk it. So, what do you think? Was it real hatred, or just a kind of complicated bond that only artists and old friends can share?